Jayek, welcome to my kitchen. I am Jody Gazautasat. I am Anishinaabe Bodewatami, Potawatomi Citizen Band, Loon Clan, and I am so happy to be here with you today. Today we are making Nswe Widgekon Mbop, or Three Sisters Soup. Now this is a family recipe, and like all family recipes, it might be a little different, but that's okay. Food sovereignty is about using what you have. So if you don't have the ingredients I'm using, that's fine. You can use whatever you have, substitute with something that's similar, or just omit if you don't like it. Traditional Three Sisters soup doesn't have any meat in it, but sometimes I like to put like a good pork belly meat in there, or some bacon, or some dried venison. That's probably my favorite. So if you want to put meat in there for that extra protein, go ahead, do it. Food sovereignty is about using what you have, what's sustainable for the environment and your family. Also, if you don't have some of these ingredients, go make friends with your neighbors, especially if you live in a rural part, because chances are they'll have something that you need and you have something that they need, so you can trade. I trade with our Amish neighbors all the time. I'm in Tennessee, there's no tribes here, so I find if I can't grow it, I will go to our Amish neighbors, because chances are they have it. So check with your neighbors, check with your family, get back to trading and swapping, and then always gift them some of the stuff that you make too. Gift giving is necessary and important for food sovereignty. So let's get to cooking. I want to list our ingredients for today. Okay, so first let's go through the ingredients I have. Just keep in mind that you can swap this out. It doesn't have to be exactly what I have. I have 1 cup of dried pinto beans. You can use any kind of beans you have. I like to start out with dried because I want it to absorb the chicken stock that I'm going to put in this instead of just water. So I start with dried beans. And then I have 1 cup of minomen, or wild rice. I like to get this, or I've been gifted this from Dynamite Hill Farms. And they are in Michigan. So that's Dynamite Hill Farms, but of course they're not coming to my brain right now, but White Earth, that's it. The White Earth Ojibwe and red something. They also have really good minomen. This is great because it's already been rinsed and washed and parched, so you can just use it as is. So I have 1 cup of that. And then I have a can of just stewed tomatoes. You can use grocery store tomatoes. You don't have to use kinds that you've put up yourself. So I've got one quart jar of stewed tomatoes. I have a quart jar of hominy that I put up. This is Walpole Island corn that I grew last year. But you can also use Walpole or hominy that you get from the grocery store or that you trade someone with. I also have dried ho-chunk squash. We're going to use probably about a cup of that, not the whole jar, because they're going to swell up quite a bit. These have been dehydrated. And then chicken stock. You can use store-bought chicken stock if you want, or stuff that you've made, or trade for it. So I've got 2 quart jars of chicken stock. I do have your form of oil. It's just bacon grease. You can use lard. You can use sunflower oil. You can use any kind of oil. It's just for when we cook down the onions. And then an onion and garlic. And then I have salt and pepper and paprika. And then I have this is probably 2 tablespoons of maple vinegar. If you can't get your hands on maple vinegar, which you should, it's the best. But if you don't have any, you can substitute this for apple cider vinegar. Just 1 to 2 tablespoons is all you need. And then I have a sprig of cedar. Cedar, when you cook it with your beans, it helps so that your guests or your family won't get gassy. And it also adds an amazing flavor. So whenever I cook beans or corn, I put in a good sized sprig of cedar. It adds flavor and it's going to cut down on the flatulence in your household. So why not? So I've got a twig of cedar. Of course, whenever you harvest anything, do it honorably. Put down tobacco, put down sema, and tell the plant what you're going to use it for. And then I have a sprig of culinary sage. I don't use ceremonial sage for this. This is culinary sage. And I like a good stick with it too, because it's going to add really, really good flavor. So that's pretty much it. So I've got our list of ingredients. I've got my pot. We're going to get the heat on and get this going. I want it fairly high because we're going to cook down the onions and the garlic first. Okay, so first I'm just going to add some of the fat that I'm using, and this is just good old bacon grease that I filter out and then save. This is probably about 2 tablespoons. I know I need to get better about measuring. My kids tell me all the time. Okay, so I've got my oil heating up in my pot. And then you're just going to add it's a fairly large onion, but whatever you have. And we're going to cook this down. So we're going to cook this down for about 5 to 10 minutes, just until they're translucent. Okay, so now the onions are super nice and translucent. Now I'm going to add, this is about 2 tablespoons of garlic. If you don't like garlic, that's fine. You don't need to have it. I think it really adds a nice depth of flavor. Also, if you can get your hands on wild onions, that's great. They're super hard to find in Tennessee, and I usually just leave them to grow because they're struggling so much here. But if you have an abundance of wild onions, it tastes amazing. I recommend that. But for this, we're just going to use a regular yellow onion and garlic. Now at this point, I'm going to add a pinch of salt and a pinch of pepper. And then just mix that all in. And then we want to get the pan really hot. So I'm going to turn it all the way up. And we're going to let this cook for a little bit. I'm going to get my chicken stock ready, because we'll be adding that next. Now, if you're watching on my BossLady Anish YouTube channel, I always read the comments, so feel free to drop, like if you have a family recipe or something, feel free to, drop in like your suggestions or whatever. Let's talk about it. It's a lot of fun, so go ahead and drop it in the comments. Okay, that's beautiful. Now I'm going to add my chicken stock. Spilled a little bit. Of course it's messy. That's also why you always have a towel handy. Clean that up. You always want to keep your surfaces nice and clean. And I always keep my sink full of hot soapy water so I can do the dishes while I'm cooking. That way there's not a huge mess to clean up after. And I'm still making a mess. You see all that lovely stuff? Just wants to jump right out of the pan. So always clean as you go. Always keep your surfaces clean, especially in this stage in Aya. So now at this point, I'm going to add my dried beans. Okay, and it can be any kind of beans. These are pinto beans, are one of my favorite, but you can use Potawatomi beans, skunk beans, black beans, whatever you have. It's about sustainability. So this is about a cup. I'm going to empty that in. And the beans are going to take the longest to cook. Now, if you are using dried hominy or dried hulled corn, you can add it now because it's going to absorb the water just like the beans. That way you don't need to soak it the night before. This way they're getting cooked and rehydrated by the chicken stock with all of the herbs. And most importantly, with our cedar that we're going to put in now. You can cut it if you want to, or just put the whole thing in. Now, if the little leaves come off, that's okay. It's part of the seasoning. So we add that in now, and then I'm going to also add my culinary sage. Just drop that right in. Okay. And while that's heating up, I'm going to add my other quart of chicken stock, because all of this is going to be absorbed into the beans. And then if you're using dried hulled corn, yeah, you didn't make a biggest mess this time. And then I'm going to add, this is about 1 to 2 tablespoons of maple vinegar. If you can't get your hands on maple vinegar, that's okay. Use apple cider vinegar. 1 to 2 tablespoons. Go ahead and add that in. That's going to bring out a ton of flavor. That's your acid for this. Remember, you always need some heat, some acid, and fat. We've already got our fat in there from when we fried up our onions. And so this is our acid, the vinegar. I'm going to add a little bit more pepper because I love pepper. If you want, you can also add some cayenne. And then I'm going to add another generous, this is probably, oh, let's just say it's like, I know I need to measure, 3 teaspoons of salt, so 1 tablespoon of salt. If you can't have salt, if you're on a low sodium diet, you can add in your salt alternative. I like to use kosher salt or sea salt. We're going to mix that all in. And we've got our beans nice and cooking. So that's perfect. Now at this point, I'm going to also add my squash. If you're using fresh squash, like winter squash, something that you're keeping over the winter. See, this is why Three Sisters soup is so amazing, because we're using all the ingredients we preserved or put up or bottled or dried to keep us going through the winter. So that's why Three Sisters soup is super nutritious and popular, because we're using all of the food that we dehydrated and preserved to get us through the winter. So now I'm going to add my dehydrated squash. If you are using fresh squash, like winter squash, ho-chunk squash, something that keeps well in a pantry or in a cellar during the winter time, you don't need to add it yet. So if you're using fresh squash, we're going to add it at the same time we're adding our canned hominy. It'll come in later. About when you have about an hour to 45 minutes left before you want to serve it, is when you'll add your canned hominy and your fresh winter squash. But since this is dehydrated, I'll try to show a close-up of it. We're going to add it now because it needs to rehydrate in the chicken stock. And it'll need time to do that. So, and I know I need to measure, but I'm horrible at it. I'm going to add about half of my quart jar. So it's really, in all honesty, it's probably like a cup of your dried squash. And if you're using fresh squash, make it 2 cups. So about that much. Let's see. Yes, I think that'll be perfect. And then if you're making a big pot, like if you're making a pot for your elders, you're making a big pot for your big family, just double this or triple it, depending on how big your guests are going to be, how many. It also freezes really well if you have room in your freezer. For me, the only people I have in my household right now is me and my son and my husband. And so I just use a medium-sized stock pot. My son is a growing boy, so he goes through a lot more food than the rest of us. So he'll probably have 2 to 3 bowls of this. My husband will probably have 2 bowls, and I'll have like 1. So just get your judgment on how much you're making. And again, it's about what you have. So at this point, I'm going to also add some paprika. It adds a really nice smoky flavor. That was probably like 1 to 2 teaspoons. And the house is smelling amazing. Now you're going to keep your sage and your cedar in there. And then I'm going to put a lid on. And I'm going to just let this simmer for 1 to 2 hours. Okay, so do that, simmer this for 1 to 2 hours, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, one thing I forgot. So before you let this simmer for 1 to 2 hours, I'm going to add my tomatoes. Now you don't have to add tomatoes. This is just another layer of acid. If you don't have tomatoes, or you don't want tomatoes, you don't like tomatoes, that's fine. You don't need to add tomatoes. But this is just a quart of stewed tomatoes I made probably a couple years ago. I like the extra acidity and extra texture it gives. So I'm going to add that now, the fluid and all. And this will cook down with all of the ingredients you already have in there, as well as absorb into the squash and the beans and the quart if you're using dried corn, whole corn. And it's just so that every bite is going to be full of flavor. So now you're going to cover it, reduce the temperature so that you're doing just a simmer. You don't want it to really boil, maybe a light boil, but you really want it to simmer for at least 1 to 2 hours. 2 hours is best, but whatever time you have, and you just want the beans and squash to be rehydrated and done. Now check on it often too. If it absorbs all of your chicken stock, add some more chicken stock. If you don't have any or it's too rich, you can just add water. But just realize we're going to be adding wild rice, menumen, and if you're using canned corn, you'll be using that next. So you want room for that. Okay, meet you back here now in an hour or so. It's been cooking for about an hour, hour and a half. And it looks and smells amazing. You can see everything, the beans and the corn have reconstituted. The tomatoes are cooking down. So it's looking perfect. So now I want to taste it because now's the time to add a little bit more seasoning if you need it. Oh, that's delicious. We're going to add just a little bit more of salt. I'm going to add my hominy that I've canned. This is probably about 1 to 2 cups, but you can use hominy that you've gotten from the store. You can use dried hominy, but of course if you use dry whole corn or dried hominy, you're going to want to add that in with the beans. So we're going to add the hominy now. And now the three sisters are all together. And then I'm going to add 1 cup of menumen. We're going to go ahead and add that in. I like a really thick soup. I don't really like a brothy soup. I want like substance in the bites. So I like it to be thick. If you like it a little bit more brothy, go ahead and add some more broth. This is your soup. You do what you want with it. So you can add more if you want. If you like it chunky like mine, this is what you do. So we're gonna just keep simmering this for probably about another 45 minutes. So the menumen will be done, the hominy and the corn will be all nice and tender, as well as the beans, and then we'll dish up. Okay, so now it is ready. It's gorgeous. The beans are nice and tender. The hominy, the corn is tender. The squash is tender. Everything looks, and see, I love it just nice and thick and hearty like this, almost like a chili instead of a soup. But if you like it more brothy, add more broth. Add more chicken stock. You can also use beef stock with this too. So I'm going to go ahead and dish this up, and then I'll show you what I do with it. And this will keep your family fed all winter long with beautiful, gorgeous nutrients. And you'll know that you're feeding them nutritious food that's super good for them. Okay, so here we are. It looks beautiful. Now I like to put on, I dry dandelion greens. You can also dry plantain. Just any kind of greens. You can use parsley if you want to, but I like dandelion greens. It's full of vitamin C and antioxidants and all sorts of other good things. That way you don't have to worry about getting scurvy because you're getting all your vitamin C. So I sprinkle that on top. And then I also like to garnish with a little bit of culinary ash. If you don't know how to make culinary ash, I've got it on my YouTube channel. I've got a quick one on my TikTok. It's probably easier to find on YouTube. I also have it on my blog. It helps your body break down the corn and the beans even more. This is especially important if you are using non-hulled corn. So if you're using corn that hasn't been turned into hominy, just straight corn, culinary ash is a great way to go because it's going to help you break down that corn. The way that you make hominy or hulled corn is with ash. So I just sprinkle a little bit on top. For this, I like culinary sage ash or cedar ash. Rosehip ash is also really, really good. So for this, I have a little bit of cedar ash. And I'm just gonna put just a tiny bit on top. It doesn't take much at all. It adds great flavor, nutrition, and it will help your body break down the nutrients even more. So here you are. Show this angle. Yes. So here you are. I hope you had a great time watching me cook for you, and I hope that you cook this too. And if you do, let me know what you think. Drop it in the comments. Until next time, bon appetit.